All right, so this is meant to serve as your introduction to both close reading and rhetorical analysis, which are two interrelated kind of skills and concepts. The rhetorical analysis essay is one of the three essays that's going to appear on the AP test, along with the open argument and the synthesis question. And it's maybe the trickiest and maybe the most unfamiliar to most of you. The reason that you have the School of Athens as the opening slide is that rhetoric was most famously, well, first and most famously systematized by Aristotle in a book that he called Rhetoric. So rhetoric, in our kind of modern parlance, refers to empty speech. So like politicians making promises that they don't intend to keep, a lot of people would call that, they would say that's just rhetoric. But in the kind of classical definition of rhetoric, the word rhetoric means the use of language for the purpose of appealing to an audience. Aristotle said that rhetoric is the use of all the available means of persuasion. So rhetorical analysis, or a rhetorical analysis essay, is an essay in which you explain how rhetorical devices, which are tools that the author uses, create a certain overall effect or serve the author's larger purpose. Maybe both. You explain how rhetorical devices create an effect and serve the purpose. So the first step in writing a rhetorical analysis essay is not actually writing, it is reading. So a close reading is what an English scholar would call a careful reading, where you basically notice everything that you can. Any figurative language, the organization overall, sentence structure, vocabulary, anything that you can notice in a close reading is positive, because most of those things are there on purpose. So the close reading of the text should lead you to not just these three things, but at least these three things. It should give you an understanding of the author's purpose. It should give you an inventory of the rhetorical devices that are used. And in cases where it's possible, not in library books or books from the textbook room, but in cases where it's possible, it should result in you taking a lot of notes on the page, underlining and circling and asking questions and making notes for yourself. So one of the things you're perhaps looking for in your close reading is tone of the piece. So tone is sort of a macro device, and it refers to the attitude that an author takes towards his or her subject. So for instance, someone who is writing a eulogy might write it in a sad or a mournful tone. Someone who is writing an email might write it in a casual tone. Someone who is writing a love poem might write it in a, romantic tone. So many devices can be used to create tone in a piece of writing. Similes, metaphors, word choice, sentence patterns, a lot of things can be used to create the tone. Diction refers to word choice. So when you're naming the device and you notice a pattern of the words that the author is using, it's not enough to say that the author uses diction. If you say that the author uses diction, all you're saying is that the author has used words. And of course the author has used words. We assume that anybody who is writing is using words. So in the same way that you need an adjective to describe the tone, it's not enough just to say that the author uses a tone. You have to have an adjective to describe the diction. And many of the same adjectives that could describe tone can also describe diction. So if you notice that the author is using a lot of words that connote happiness, you could say that the author uses cheerful diction. If you notice that the author is using a lot of words that have to do with death, you might say that the author is using morbid diction. In a lab report, the diction would be scientific. In a a formal speech, the diction, you could say, might be elevated, but you have to have an adjective to describe what kind of diction it is. And diction is one of, again, the many things that can create or can contribute to a tone. So as you do your close reading, one of the things that you really want to look for is patterns. The most obvious pattern, perhaps, is repetition of words. So if the author repeats words over and over again within, say, a paragraph or a page, we assume that that word is being repeated because the author has put some, sees it as being important. Other patterns, you could say a list is a pattern. That would be more of like a pattern of syntax, of shift in tone or diction. For instance, if there was the paragraph that you're reading starts off very happy, and then at the end it says, and then Joe died, that would be a significant shift in diction, and that's important. Repeating a sentence beginning, repeating a sentence ending, using only one kind of sentence, using only very short sentences or very long sentences, or using a short sentence in a sea of very long sentences. Any pattern that you notice is probably significant. Whoops. So the bare bones of a successful rhetorical analysis essay or paragraph will include these three things. You're going to identify the author's purpose, you're going to identify rhetorical strategies, which are those small devices, and then you're going to, in your analysis, connect those two. So the first two bullet points here should go in your controlling idea, or in your thesis or your topic sentence. Controlling idea is generally the term I use. And your controlling idea should have both a quantitative and a qualitative element. So your controlling idea should have summary of something that is there, the device, and then it should have analysis of how that serves a purpose. So, for instance, if you said in the opening paragraph of The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, the author repeats the word carried to emphasize both its literal and figurative, the literal and figurative burden that the soldiers carry, that would be excellent. It has both a quantitative component, where you identify the device, the repetition, and it has a qualitative component where you identify the purpose, saying that it emphasizes a burden. So finally, to give you some general guidelines of what I would like to see in your essays and your paragraphs, I really think a strong controlling idea is maybe the most important thing. Essays or paragraphs that start with a strong controlling idea are generally well organized and logically sound. And essays without a strong controlling idea tend to be scattered and kind of haphazard in their organization. So starting with a strong controlling idea that's both qualitative and quantitative is important. You should use quoted examples. They should be embedded, but they should be very, very short. 1 word or 2 words or 3 words. There's hardly ever any need to quote a whole sentence. And then following those examples, there should be analysis how those examples, that device, serves the author's purpose, creates an overall effect, reaches the audience in some way. And then finally, I would say your paragraphs should be at least equally qualitative and quantitative. So they should be at least equal in terms of having summary and analysis, but you should really aim to have more analysis than there is summary. So I hope this gives you a fair idea of where we're going with this sort of writing. We'll work on this, for a long time. But hopefully you can look back at this if you have any questions and they can be clarified.